Welcome to our feature called From Taboo to Jackpot, the NFL's Betting Revolution. This is the story of how the NFL went from being absolutely staunchly opposed to gambling to endorse it, promoting it, and allowing it to completely change the way most people fundamentally evaluate it. Victoria will introduce each section in this enthralling narrative, and we will examine the history behind the process.
The Vegas Gamble.
In 2017, the NFL stands at a crossroads, facing its greatest challenge yet. The decision to move the Raiders to Las Vegas sparks controversy and debate among the league's elite. Commissioner Roger Goodell and the NFL owners approve the move, yet they remain publicly opposed to the very essence of Vegas, sports betting. This episode sets the stage, contrasting the NFL's historical stance against gambling with the seismic shift that's about to come.
The tipping point.
A year after the Raiders' controversial move, the NFL prepares for an unprecedented pivot. Behind closed doors, league officials present a compelling case to the owners. Embracing legalized sports betting could unlock untold riches and deepen fan engagement. This episode dives into the secretive black ops efforts by the NFL to understand global sports betting, laying the groundwork for a complete reversal of their stance.
The supreme shift.
May 2018 marks a watershed moment for the NFL and sports betting in America. The Supreme Court's decision to strike down PASPA changes everything, forcing the NFL to abandon its long-held opposition to sports gambling. This episode explores the immediate aftermath of the decision, the league's strategic pivot, and the initial steps toward embracing sports betting as a key part of its future.
Betting on the future.
The NFL's embrace of sports betting brings about a new era. Commercials for bookmakers and discussions of betting lines become ubiquitous in NFL broadcasts. This episode examines how the league's strategy to engage younger fans through legalized betting begins to bear fruit, with a special focus on the demographic shift among NFL viewers and bettors.
The highs and lows.
With the rise of sports betting, the NFL faces new challenges and controversies. This episode delves into the dark side of the betting boom, including the suspension of players for betting violations. At the same time, it showcases the financial windfall for the league and its teams, highlighting the complex relationship between sports betting and the integrity of the game.
The Vegas Super Bowl.
The climax of the series, this episode centers on the ultimate symbol of the NFL's transformation, hosting the Super Bowl in Las Vegas. The spectacle of the game, combined with its location in the heart of America's betting capital, serves as the clearest indicator yet of the league's new era. Interviews with key figures, insights into the game's impact on sports betting, and a look at the broader cultural shift within the NFL encapsulate the journey from taboo to jackpot.
Conclusion: a change game.
The series wraps up with reflections on how the NFL's relationship with sports betting has evolved. From staunch opposition to strategic embrace, the league's journey mirrors broader changes in American attitudes towards gambling. Through interviews, analysis, and behind-the-scenes insights, the series offers a comprehensive look at how betting transformed the NFL and what the future holds for America's favorite sport in the era of legalized gambling.
We get bombarded by media sponsors who gleefully endorse the NFL's every move. But in the heartland of America, some competing views are expressed, and some are not exactly complementary to the NFL's stated ideals. Let's examine what people are saying in the comments section of major American newspapers.
Ted G. writes, "What odds can I get on the Super Bowl being a fixed match this year?"
Well, Vincent, that goes to the heart of the matter. What Ted refers to is what most Americans feel, and that is that the criminal element is not far away from any gambling endeavor.
Well, if you look at Vegas, it was created by mobsters, but eventually the big corporations took over and cleaned things up.
Really? What are you smoking?
Let's move on. John McMonagle weighed in with, "The league was adamant until they resort could make money from it."
That is so true. The NFL couldn't care less about player and fan health. Consider the fact that the NFL did virtually nothing about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, except run a PR campaign mostly. Remember, the average lifespan of an NFL player is 56. You lose 20 years off your life when you become an NFL player.
How much lifespan do compulsive gamblers lose?
What about the family of the gambler? How are they affected?
Let's continue to examine what America feels about the NFL gambling endorsement. Sean M. had an interesting perspective. Interesting that ESPN is running a story on the same subject. The irony of the NFL now embracing gambling, filed at about the same time as this story. This one at least covers the pitfalls of expanded gambling, partly. The bigger pitfall story is the negative financial impact of greater NFL gambling on gamblers, their families and friends and employers, productivity loss, embezzlement, etc. We'll also likely at some point see a massive gambling fraud involving officials, coaches, staff, and/or players.
It's just a matter of time.
Rick V.A. Schick submitted this. It's interesting to me that there seems to be no conversation about the availability of sports gambling on addicts. Being able to gamble away their mortgage payment on their phone 24/7 isn't really any different than a liquor store in the kitchen of an alcoholic or a drug den in the living room of a drug addict. Obviously nothing is going to change, but nobody seems to be acknowledging the problem, which again is just an interesting observation for me. Personally, I don't gamble because I don't like to lose money. Each to their own, I guess.
It's always the families that suffer.
To demonstrate the hypocrisy of the sports industry, consider this comment from Norman Klim. Pete Rose will shortly be inducted to the NFL Hall of Fame.
Not everyone remembers Pete Rose, the baseball player that lost everything when he was charged with gambling on a game.
Bob Delorier of Mallorytown had this to say: "The NFL is getting more and more like the World Wrestling Federation. Do you know who wins the wrestling match? The one that is handpicked by management to win, and it all depends on fan reaction and promotion ability. Now, do you not think the NFL will follow the same path? Of course they will. Give the fans what they want. In 10 years, the entire season's outcome will be dependent on Nielsen ratings and profitability, just like it is now."
Wise words form a wise man.
Alan Reyes had a poignant response. Now that most state governments are both bookies and drug dealers, selling gambling and marijuana, hey, what could go wrong with that as a culture?
You got it.
Joseph Scott submitted this. The article states the average NFL fan is over 50 years old. Sounds to me like the NFL is heading for the dustbin of history.
Maybe that's why the NFL allowed gambling, to attract younger players.
Stephen Colley had a good point. NFL broadcasts have become one of the most boring things on this earth. 15 minutes of action in a 3-hour event. Gambling can only help juice it up. Kind of like playing golf. Much more interesting with money on a putt.
I guess a person is more focused when their rent money is on the game.
According to RI, the NFL's internal research showed that for every dollar it gets directly in revenue from gambling, it would receive 3 to 4 times that amount indirectly from people watching more games. So, the NFL makes $360 million from gambling sponsorships, and that results in $1.26 billion. So an extra $1.62 billion, or 8 points revenue growth. The NFL is truly the kingmaker. It is the most valuable entertainment product on earth.
Sad, isn't it?
This response from Paul Smith was probably the best. From 1992 to 2022, there was $41.2 billion wagered on football. That figure dwarfs the $29.8 billion bet on basketball and $21 billion on baseball. And in other news, most Americans don't have $1,000 set aside for emergencies. Probably just a coincidence.
There appears to be two main centers of thought about this issue. The first is the negative impact of gambling on society generally, and the second is the question of whether criminal forces will become more involved with the process, affecting the outcome of games. Some feel that at least the legitimate, organized gambling corporations are taking money away from legitimate bookmakers, who have thrived for centuries. In Canada, it was thought that legitimizing marijuana sales would take business away from street dealers. In actual fact, the oppressive taxes the government has imposed has made street drugs the affordable choice. So the black market still thrives. However, in all fairness, the legitimate price of an ounce of marijuana has dropped from $300 an ounce to about $100, so there is some benefit to the consumer.
So bookies will still thrive.
The net result is, the NFL will grow larger. Its profits will become even more astronomical. Middle-aged former football players will still die young due to the damage that football causes on the field. Gambling companies will continue to grow, taking more disposable income away from families. A growing number of healthcare professionals will have to be hired to treat the mental illness that compulsive gambling causes. Families will continue to break up in larger numbers. Society will continue to finance the damage caused by this kind of legitimate activity. but it will be paid for by gambling tax revenues. This seems to me like a surefire way to decrease the quality of life in a civilization.
It's a different world out there now. All I can say is buyer beware.